The light rain was beginning to transform the sidewalks of Manhattan into a fragmented mirror when Ethan Caldwell, 38, walked through the revolving glass door of the Empire State Financial Center. His navy blue suit was impeccable as always, every fold at the perfect angle. He walked with the automatic confidence of someone accustomed to having the world at his fingertips with a phone call. But on this strangely quiet morning, there was an unease in his step, something small, almost imperceptible, but real. Perhaps it was just the overcast weather. Perhaps it was the notification that appeared on his cell phone at 6:14 a.m., while he was still lying down, with the neutral message from his bank, update available on the customer dashboard, check when possible. Ethan wasn't just rich, he was the kind of rich person who rarely checked his balance. His wealth didn't reside in numbers flashing on screens, it resided in investments, assets, holdings, real estate. But that notification had a different tone. It didn't say monthly report, it didn't say portfolio update. It said client dashboard, something more technical, more specific, more targeted. Upon entering the ground floor, Ethan greeted the receptionist without really seeing her. His eyes were focused on the private elevator that would take him to the 57th floor, where his company, Caldwell Holdings, occupied practically all the space. It was an empire built on bold decisions, calculated risk, and an almost total absence of hesitation. He was good at what he did. He knew it. Everyone knew it. At the same time, in that same building, but in a completely different environment, 27-year-old Jordan Hale walked with quick, nervous steps between desks overflowing with documents. Jordan wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He had rolled-up sleeves, deep dark circles under his eyes, and a permanent expression of someone trying to solve 10 problems at once. He was a digital security analyst, recently hired to strengthen the building's data protection system. Jordan was intelligent, meticulous, and extremely good at detecting patterns. And precisely for that reason, from the early hours of that morning, something rattled inside his head. There was strange data traffic coming from the server associated with Caldwell Holdings' corporate bank accounts. It wasn't an obvious attack, it was something more subtle, almost elegant. An information diversion that seemed meticulously planned. Jordan didn't have proof yet, but he already had an unsettling certainty. This wasn't normal. Meanwhile, Ethan finally arrived at his office, spacious, minimalist, illuminated by enormous windows that displayed the city as if it were a living painting. He dropped his briefcase on the desk, loosened his tie, and opened his laptop. His secretary appeared at the door to remind him of the 10 a.m. meeting, but he merely nodded without actually registering it. He was focused on the notification. Upon accessing the banking portal, Ethan typed in his credentials quickly, as if doing so without thinking. The screen loaded slowly, slower than it should have, and then the central panel appeared. Ethan froze. It wasn't the number I expected. It wasn't the number that could to exist, because where hundreds of millions should have been distributed among accounts, funds, and investments, there were absurdly discrepant values, some extremely high, others surprisingly low, and some simply impossible. For a few seconds, Ethan thought it was a temporary error, something graphical, a bug. But as she moved further along the flaps, a feeling of discomfort began to tighten in her stomach. Each transaction appeared real. Each transfer had valid authentication. Each update was timed precisely, some of them that same night. He couldn't tell if it was a huge mistake or if someone had deeply tampered with his world. As Ethan analyzed line by line, a silent figure approached his glass door. Adrian Cross, 52, his partner and co-founder of the company. Adrian was the complete opposite of Ethan. While Ethan was calculating, quick and competitive, Adrian was cautious, methodical, and often overly suspicious. They complemented each other initially, but the last few months had been tense. Internal disagreements, rumors of betrayal, missing documents, accounting errors that appeared and disappeared like dust swept under an expensive rug. Adrian entered without knocking. "Have you seen the report?" he asked directly, without formalities or beating around the bush. Ethan stared at him. Something in Adrian's tone sounded strange, as if he knew exactly what Ethan was seeing. Ethan partially closed the screen as an instinctive reflex. "I'm still analyzing it," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Adrian gave a half smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone watching a domino about to fall. Meanwhile, in the building's basement, Jordan Hale watched the lines of code flashing on the screen. The suspicious data traffic had intensified again, now coming from a terminal on the 57th floor, and he knew perfectly well who was on the 57th floor at that time. The protagonist, the antagonist. The conflict was beginning to take shape. The mystery, however, was only just beginning. The constant blaring of sirens mingled with the distant sound of morning traffic as Manhattan fully awoke. On the 57th floor, Ethan Caldwell tried to maintain his composure, but his mind raced. Each tab opened on the banking portal revealed numbers that didn't make sense. Some accounts showed larger amounts than they should. Inflated values, unexpected deposits, sums multiplied in irregular patterns. Others showed subtle, almost imperceptible, yet still dangerous reductions. Ethan felt like he was looking at a puzzle whose final image he couldn't yet recognize. But if there was one thing he knew about himself, it was that he hated not being in control of a situation. He stood up and walked to the window. The city seemed indifferent to anyone's problems, including his own. That was how Manhattan worked. Gigantic, impersonal, unforgiving. Perhaps that was why so many men like him thrived there, because they learned to survive even when everything around them tried to swallow them whole. Behind him, Adrian Cross still stood near the door, observing every movement with calculating eyes. Adrian was a man of measured words, almost always hiding his emotions behind a mask of serenity. However, in recent months, Ethan had noticed a subtle change in his partner's behavior. Frequent lateness, documents that only he had access to, external meetings that he didn't share. Nothing was explicit, but anyone with a business instinct would smell trouble brewing. "We need to talk," Adrian said finally. "Today." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He preferred to return to his desk and slowly close his laptop, hiding the financial dashboard as if he were protecting an open wound. "After the 10 o'clock meeting," he replied curtly. "I have other priorities now." Adrian watched him for a few more seconds before nodding slowly and leaving the office. Ethan noticed the way he left, quickly but trying to appear calm. It was an old trick of someone hiding something. Meanwhile, underground, Jordan Hale continued trying to understand the pattern of the suspicious traffic. He zoomed in on the logs, analyzed each packet, each route, each transfer. There was something sophisticated about that data manipulation. It didn't seem like an external attack. There were no brute force intrusion attempts, no direct traces of international hackers. In fact, it seemed almost internal. Jordan didn't want to believe it, but the deeper he investigated, the more evident it became. The irregularities were coming from an authorized user, someone with high privileges, someone familiar with the Caldwell Holdings financial ecosystem. He took a deep breath. He knew the danger of such a suspicion. He also knew that in that company, loyalty and ambition often mixed like gasoline and matches. On the 57th floor, the frenetic routine of the employees contrasted sharply with the growing tension at the top. The atmosphere at Caldwell Holdings was modern, vibrant, with large desks, glass walls, and a constant flow of rapid conversations. It was the heart of a financial empire that from the outside seemed solid, impenetrable, almost unshakable. But as Ethan was beginning to realize, great structures could also crumble silently. Sometimes all it took was a single, hidden point of vulnerability. Among the employees, Stories about Ethan and Adrian circulated in whispers. Veiled secrets, suspicions about internal disagreements, rumors that something was about to collapse. No one was sure of anything, but everyone felt the change in the air, the tension that precedes an earthquake. In another area, Jordan left his terminal to go up a few floors. He needed to personally check the intermediary server that bridged the gap between the internal system and the corporate dashboard. It was a restricted access area, something that only increased the likelihood that his guess was correct. Upon entering the air-conditioned room filled with cables, panels, and flashing lights, Jordan found an unexpected clue, a device connected to the primary router. Something small, discreet, but powerful enough to redirect information without triggering typical alarms. One man in the middle physical. Jordan swallowed hard. That changed everything. It wasn't just a digital diversion. It was a plan meticulously and precisely crafted. And someone with physical access, someone high up, needed to be involved. The discovery gave Jordan a simultaneous feeling of victory and fear. He knew he should report it immediately to his superiors, but he also knew that this could put him in danger if the person involved was precisely the one who was supposed to receive him. Above him, Ethan returned to the bank portal, now with a colder determination. The discrepancies were too widespread to be accidental. The almost imperceptible pattern of cross-transfers, distributed among small accounts and temporary funds, indicated meticulous manipulation. And there was one name that came up in more transactions than it should have. He closed his eyes for a moment. Adrian, or someone trying to frame Adrian. In any case, Ethan knew he was entering dangerous territory. And, without realizing it, Jordan was about to become the key piece of the puzzle that held it all together. The morning dragged on with the merciless speed typical of Manhattan. But for Ethan Caldwell, time seemed stuck in a spiral of escalating tension. Each new check on the financial dashboard added another disjointed piece to the puzzle. The feeling that something serious was happening tightened his chest, but he kept his face impassive. Men like him didn't show weakness. They couldn't. At 10 a.m., the meeting began in the glass-walled room that dominated the center of the floor. Ethan was physically present, but his mind remained fixed on the numbers. The director spoke about investments, projections, new international clients, but everything sounded distant, as if it were happening behind a thick wall. Adrian, seated opposite him, kept his fingers interlaced and observed Ethan in an almost clinical manner. He was too calm, too serene. Ethan realized something was wrong. While he was trying to concentrate, a discreet notification popped up on his phone, an internal alert from the digital security team. A name appeared on the screen. Jordan Hale, Priority Alert Level 2. Ethan frowned. High-level alerts rarely came, and when they did, they never came from newly arrived analysts. He swiped his finger across his phone, pretending to check a trivial email, but his eyes caught the words that would change the course of that day. Identification of an external device connected to the primary router. Possible data interception. Ethan's blood ran cold for a moment. He turned off the screen, took a deep breath, and returned to the meeting only to realize that Adrian was still watching him. "Something wrong?" Adrian asked, feigning nonchalance. "Nothing I can't handle," Ethan replied, returning an equally fake smile. Immediately after the meeting ended, Ethan walked quickly down the corridors to the security room located on the 29th floor. He entered unceremoniously, ignoring surprised glances. Jordan was there, leaning over a monitor with the tense expression of someone who had just crossed a dangerous line. "Did you send this?" Ethan asked, displaying the notification on his cell phone. Jordan was startled. He hadn't expected to see the company owner in person, much less so soon. "Me?" "Yes, sir. I thought it was urgent." "Explain." Jordan hesitated for a second before deciding there was no time for beating around the bush. "There's a device connected to the router that shouldn't be there. It's subtly diverting data packets. This isn't a conventional attack. It's something planned by someone who knows the system inside out, and the traffic is mainly directed to the servers that store the company's financial accounts, Jordan said, pointing to lines of code flowing across the screen. Ethan approached and analyzed the logs. Even without technically understanding every detail, he recognized patterns and intent. "Do you have any idea who could have done this?" Ethan asked. Jordan took a deep breath. "I don't have proof yet, but the access patterns associated with the traffic suggest a high-level user." Ethan stared directly at him. "Adrian?" Jordan swallowed hard. "I can't say for sure, but some records match his login time." Ethan stepped away, walking slowly across the room as a rudimentary plan began to form in his mind. If Adrian was truly involved, he would have planned everything flawlessly. But if someone were trying to frame him, they would also be clever enough to simulate those patterns. The problem was simple, yet immense. Ethan couldn't trust anyone. "Jordan," Ethan said, turning to him, "keep investigating, but don't talk to anyone else about this. Understand? No one." Jordan nodded. His throat was dry. He knew the weight of that instruction. Meanwhile, Adrian walked down the hallway of the 57th floor toward Ethan's office. He was different. Firmer steps, a harder look. He entered the empty office and surveyed the desk, as if searching for something. Then he approached the still-closed laptop. His finger touched the lid for a moment. He hesitated. Then he withdrew his hand. Adrian didn't want to leave any trace. He stepped back and looked out the window. The city was down below, pulsating, alive, indifferent. For a moment, his face lost its usual serenity. He looked tired, or perhaps too pressured. Minutes later, Jordan left the security room and headed to the elevator. He needed to check the second intermediate server. He entered the cabin and pressed the button for the 44th floor. The doors were almost closing when someone held the side open with their hand. Adrian entered the elevator. Jordan straightened up immediately. He hadn't expected to find his partner there. For a few seconds, silence filled the space. "You're Jordan, right?" Adrian asked, with an almost neutral expression. Jordan nodded. "You work with security, right?" Jordan felt a chill down his spine. "Yes, sir." Adrian watched him for a moment that seemed far too long. "Good to know," he said, before looking away. The elevator continued its descent. Jordan felt his breath quicken. For a moment he had the feeling that Adrian knew exactly what he had discovered. But there was no proof, and without evidence, Jordan was vulnerable. The elevator stopped on the 44th floor. Jordan stepped out too quickly, his legs trembling, and as the doors closed behind him, Adrian remained inside, motionless, with an unreadable expression. It was official. The conflict was now alive, pulsating, and could explode at any moment. As afternoon approached, Caldwell Holdings buzzed like a restless beehive. Employees came and went, phone calls multiplied, meetings overlapped. But beneath all this apparent routine, there was an underlying, almost electric vibration, as if the entire building sensed the tension within its walls. While Ethan analyzed documents in his office, Jordan Hale walked toward the second intermediate server, his head spinning. Each step echoed the scene in the elevator. That brief encounter with Adrian had left him with the feeling of being watched, tested, measured. He still didn't know if it was paranoia or instinct, and that was what bothered him most. On the 44th floor, Jordan accessed the technical room and began reviewing the cables and records. It was just another preventative check, but he knew that any detail could reveal the next piece of the puzzle. While checking each piece of equipment, he found something he didn't expect. A recently replaced cable marked with a label that didn't match the company's internal standard. He photographed the serial number and opened the maintenance log system. The technician responsible had been someone named MR, initials Jordan didn't recognize. No technician in the building had that name. He cross-referenced the data with the employee database and nothing came up. This meant one thing: someone from outside had been granted authorized access. Jordan swallowed hard. This only increased the complexity. Perhaps Adrian wasn't involved, or perhaps he was in an even bigger game. But there was another possibility, a dangerous scenario. An unknown third party was at work behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Ethan was in a private meeting with one of his most senior directors, Harold Stein, a 63-year-old man with a serious expression and firm posture. Harold had served Caldwell Holdings since its early years, when operations were still small, and knew the company and its partners intimately. "Ethan," Harold said, closing the door carefully, "I was informed that you requested additional access to older financial reports. Is that true?" "Yes," Ethan replied bluntly. Harold frowned. "What is happening?" Ethan carefully chose his words. "Something doesn't add up. The accounts are inconsistent. I need to understand if this started now or if it's been happening for a while." Harold watched him closely. Then he said, "Do you think it's Adrian?" Ethan remained silent, long enough for Harold to understand. "Ethan," Harold sighed, "you need to be careful. I've worked with you for decades. Don't underestimate what people do when they're cornered." The words echoed in Ethan's mind. He knew Harold spoke from experience, and if Harold was worried, it meant the situation was even more serious. Meanwhile, in another sector of the company, a subplot was gaining momentum. Marissa Cole, head of internal audit, began to notice unusual activity: requests for old reports, cross-access, duplicate requisitions. She was a meticulous professional, known for never letting anything slip by. Marissa realized there were two strange patterns, one coming from Ethan and another that seemed to come from someone trying to cover their tracks. Marissa decided to start her own investigation, silent, discreet. She didn't fully trust Ethan, but she trusted Adrian even less. She had seen this kind of war before in the corporate world. When two giants start vying for power, the collateral damage affects everyone. At that same moment, Jordan returned to the security room with the records of the replaced cable. He began cross-referencing information: dates, times, building access, internal movement. And then he found an intriguing coincidence. The cable had been replaced on the same morning that Adrian attended an external meeting without informing anyone internally. This could incriminate him, or it could be a perfect distraction. Just as Jordan was about to delve deeper into the data, he received an unexpected call on the internal extension. "Jordan Hale." The voice was feminine, firm and professional. "Yes. This is Marissa Cole from auditing. I need to speak with you in person. Now." Jordan felt a chill. Until then, he had only been an analyst dealing with a technical anomaly. Now, one of the most powerful people in the company wanted his immediate attention. Unsure whether this was good or bad, he replied, "I'm on my way." As he walked down the hallway, Jordan realized that what had started as a technical problem was turning into a game of internal manipulation. There were too many pieces being moved at once. Ethan reviewing old reports, Adrian acting with strange precision, Marissa investigating on her own, and now a phantom technician with unknown initials. On the 57th floor, Adrian watched the team's movements intently. Too many people were curious. Too much information was circulating. He knew perfectly well that this could get out of control, and he needed to regain the advantage before Ethan made his first public move. The subplots intertwined, creating a web of mounting pressures. Each piece moved increased the tension, and the feeling that time was running out for everyone intensified. Jordan Hale entered the audit room, feeling the weight of that meeting. Marissa Cole stood before a large table, laden with reports, sealed folders, and two screens displaying graphs pulsing in real time. She didn't smile. She didn't greet him. She simply pointed to the chair. "Sit down." Jordan obeyed. "You've been messing with the infrastructure records, haven't you?" Marissa asked, typing something without taking her eyes off the screens. "Yes. There was a failure in the internal data routing and—" "I know," she interrupted him. But I want you to tell me exactly what you found. Jordan took a deep breath. There is a transmission cable that was recently replaced. The serial number is not in our internal records, and the technician who signed off on the procedure does not exist in the system. Marissa finally looked at him. This isn't a technical fault. This is water infiltration. The word hung in the air like a shard of glass. Jordan felt the urge to deny or downplay it, but he couldn't. He already suspected it. "What is the cable connected to?" she asked. Jordan swiped the photo on the tablet and zoomed in. An intermediary server that handles financial data routes. It is not the main server, but any transmission that passes through it can be replicated. Marissa pressed her lips together. So someone is collecting information or altering it. She pulled out a red folder, opened it, and placed it in front of Jordan. The document contained records of internal transfers at Caldwell Holdings, totaling millions. Minor differences in timestamps and intermediate destinations, almost imperceptible, except to someone like her. That, Marissa explained, is manipulation with millimeter precision. It's not outright theft, it's silent embezzlement. Jordan remained silent. This was much bigger than just a piece of equipment being swapped. "And there's more," Marissa continued. "A second pattern has emerged in the last 3 months. Every time this deviation occurred, Adrian Caldwell was out of the building." Jordan raised his eyebrows. This could incriminate him, but it could also have been done on purpose. "Exactly." Marissa crossed her arms. "Either he's responsible or someone very clever is using his movements as a smokescreen." Tensions rose. Jordan realized that Marissa hadn't called him there just to confirm a suspicion. She wanted someone from outside the inner circle, someone who wasn't politically compromised. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Marissa gave a half smile, a cold one. "Not yet, but I want to see how far you can go." She slid in another document. "This is confidential. Don't leave this room." She projected a diagram of internal access intersections onto the screen. "There's another name appearing in the shadows." Jordan leaned forward, trying to decipher it. "MR 778, he read. Marissa confirmed with a nod. "This is the identifier of the user who authorized the fake cable. It doesn't correspond to any employee, but it does correspond to an old standard, a type of credential that only 3 people knew how to use." Jordan felt his stomach churn. Who are these people? Marissa turned the screen. The names came out one by one. 1. Adrian Caldwell. 2. Ethan Caldwell. 3. Harold Stein. Jordan leaned back. Suddenly, everything seemed more dangerous. "I don't believe Ethan would do that," Jordan said, almost defensively. "And Harold, he's practically part of the company's foundation." "And that's precisely why he would have full access," Marissa retorted. "Don't forget, too much power always complicates things." Jordan ran a hand over his face, trying to piece things together. "Do you want me to investigate which of the 3 used or lost that access?" "No," Marissa replied. "I want you to find out who else knew that this type of credential existed." Jordan understood the gravity of the situation. What if nobody else knew? Marissa closed the tablet, putting everything away meticulously. "So we're dealing with someone within the board of directors, or someone so close to them that they should never have existed." Jordan left the room with his heart racing. He had made his first concrete discovery, and it opened a dangerous abyss at the heart of Caldwell Holdings. Nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan Caldwell's office had always been quiet, elegant, and almost obsessively organized. But that afternoon, the atmosphere held a new tension, as if the air were too heavy for the room to contain. Ethan was reviewing a series of spreadsheets when he heard the door open without warning. It was Adrian. The older brother entered with firm but not aggressive steps. He closed the door carefully, like someone who knew that any unnecessary noise could attract unwanted attention. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He let the silence settle, studying his brother's reaction through his peripheral movements. "Are you busy?" Adrian asked, his voice too calm. "Always," Ethan replied, still not looking directly at him. "But you never knock before entering, so I assume it's important." Adrian smiled slightly. "And it is." He approached, resting his hands on the back of the chair in front of the table, leaning slightly. Ethan finally looked up. The two exchanged a cold, mathematical glance, like two swordsmen measuring the distance before the first strike. "I heard you requested access to the old files," Adrian said. The sentence came across gently, but the subtext was a sharp blade. Ethan crossed his arms. "And since when do my internal consultations need your approval?" "They don't need to," Adrian said, shrugging, "but I find it curious. You never review the reports from before the restructuring. It's not your style. Perhaps my style is changing. Or perhaps you're worried about something." Ethan held her gaze. He didn't blink. "We all should be," he replied. "The company has been recording anomalous flows. Someone is manipulating information. I don't know who yet, but I'm looking into it." Adrian analyzed each word, as if trying to dissect what was true and what was provocation. "Anomalous flows," Adrian repeated. "Interesting. I also heard you've been talking to Jordan." "Jordan is competent." "Jordan is impressionable," Adrian corrected. "Too young, too ambitious, easily influenced." Ethan rested his hands on the table. "Are you suggesting that I'm influencing him in some way?" "I'm saying that maybe you're being selective, Ethan." The answer came immediately. "And you, Adrian, are being too curious." The two stared at each other for long seconds. The silence became almost unbearable. It seemed like it was about to break, but it didn't. He remained tense, sharp, vibrant, and then Adrian changed his tone. He relaxed his shoulders. He spoke more softly. "Ethan, we've always been good together. The board trusts us. We don't need to turn this into a game of mistrust." Ethan noticed the attempt, a calculated reconciliation. But his voice came out firm. "This isn't a game of mistrust, it's a game of facts, and when I find what I'm looking for, it won't matter who's in the way." Adrian took a deep breath. He tilted his head, studying his brother, as if he were watching a piece that was beginning to move off the chessboard. "Be careful not to find things that you will regret later." "Be careful," Ethan retorted. "Sometimes those who hide too much forget where they left their own shadows." They stood motionless for a moment. Then Adrian gave a small, almost imperceptible smile and turned to leave. But before opening the door, he said without looking back, "If you want to talk, find me, while there's still time." And he left. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, feeling a chill run down his spine. The conversation hadn't yielded any answers, but it made it clear that Adrian knew more than he admitted, much more. The conversation with Adrian lingered in Ethan's mind for hours, even as he pretended to continue his routine. But unlike other times, he didn't allow the unease to consume him. For the first time in a long time, he felt he was moving, that he was ceasing to react and beginning to act. He left the Caldwell Financial Building at dusk. The parking lot was nearly empty, lit only by tall lampposts that cast long, fragmented shadows. He walked with measured steps, but there was something different about him. A quiet, condensed, almost dangerous determination. Jordan was waiting for him beside the car. The young analyst seemed nervous, as if he had spent the entire day wrestling with his own conscience before approaching. "I found a few things," Jordan said bluntly. "You need to see them." Ethan studied him for a moment. Jordan didn't look away. That was a good sign. "Then let's go," Ethan replied. The two got into the car and drove to a discreet co-working space in the city center, where Jordan rented a room for personal projects. In reality, it was where he did everything he didn't want the company to track. Upon entering, Ethan noticed the organized chaos that perfectly reflected the kind of mind Jordan possessed. Cables, monitors, notes stuck to glass walls. The young man was already turning on the computers before Ethan even took off his coat. I investigated the anomalies you mentioned, Jordan began, and I found patterns. But these aren't ordinary patterns. They're layers upon layers, tiny, almost imperceptible changes spread over long periods, things that would seem natural in a month, but which accumulated over years. He touched a few keys. The screen lit up with complex graphics. They become impossible to ignore. Ethan approached. The numbers jumped out at him. Disguised transfers, tiny accounting discrepancies, redirections. It was the kind of fraud that only someone extremely intelligent, patient, and well-positioned could pull off. This isn't the work of an impulsive person, Ethan said, analyzing the situation. It's someone methodical, precise, someone who knows exactly how each system works. Jordan nodded. I thought the same thing, and that's why I did something else. He took a deep breath. I compiled the internal records from the last 15 years and ran comparisons with the actions that you and your brother had the autonomy to perform. To see individual patterns. Ethan slowly turned his face towards him. Have you compared our digital signatures? Jordan hesitated. Yes. There was fear, but also courage. Ethan recognized the gesture. Jordan had risked his own career, perhaps much more for it. And what did you find? Ethan asked in a low voice. Jordan opened a file. A set of encrypted signatures stood out on the screen, with probability percentages next to them. It doesn't match yours. Ethan felt a brief relief, but he didn't allow it to take control. He kept a neutral expression. But Jordan pressed a key. The screen split in two. On one side, the suspicious patterns. On the other side, a name, Adrian Caldwell. His signature appears in 82% of the suspicious changes, Jordan added. But there's one more thing. He opened a fragment of code. Someone is actively trying to cover their tracks. The most recent changes were made in the last 24 hours, and if they continue at this rate, everything will disappear in less than a week. Ethan took a deep breath. The impact of the information was physical, visceral, like a punch to the gut. The truth was closer than I had imagined, and far more dangerous. But something changed inside him at that moment. There was no more hesitation. There was no longer even a shadow of doubt that had haunted him for months. There was clarity. Ethan paced back and forth across the room, absorbing every detail. He remembered every decision he had made since he suspected his brother. Keep his distance, observe, test small reactions. Everything he had done up to that point had been defensive, but not now. Now he would move forward. Jordan, he said, stopping in front of the young man, do you understand what this means? Jordan swallowed hard. That your brother, say, could destroy the company, or worse. It means, Ethan continued, that we need to move fast. Before he erases everything, before he realizes where we are. The young man nodded, and then Ethan did something Jordan didn't expect. He put his hand on his shoulder. You were brave today, and that makes you a part of this, whether you like it or not. But I promise, I will protect you. Jordan smiled, a tense but sincere smile. I trust you. And in that instant, Ethan realized that he had grown up. Not just as an executive, not just as an impromptu investigator, but as a leader. He was no longer just trying to survive the internal pressure. He was building a new, sharp courage that propelled him forward. It was the first time in months that he felt in control, but it was also the first time he had realized, with absolute clarity, the size of the abyss he was about to face. And he wouldn't back down. When Ethan left the co-working space, night had already fallen. The cold Chicago wind cut like glass, but he barely felt it. The information revealed by Jordan pulsed in his mind like a revving engine. Every step he took along the dark sidewalk seemed laden with purpose, a purpose he could no longer ignore. The city around them continued its usual rhythm, cars passing by, distant horns honking, the orange glow of the streetlights reflecting in the puddles left by the rain. But for Ethan, everything was silent. The world seemed compressed, as if it were holding its breath along with him, waiting for the next movement. As I got into the car, my cell phone vibrated. A message by Adrian. We need to talk. Today, before you make the wrong decisions. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Time was speeding up. Adrian had sensed something. Perhaps he didn't know exactly what Ethan had discovered, but he knew his brother was meddling where he shouldn't, and that made everything more urgent. Before answering, Ethan took a deep breath. He knew that if he scheduled the meeting now, Adrian would probably try to manipulate the situation, offering subtle explanations, reversing narratives, turning suspicions into misunderstandings. It was his specialty. But on the other hand, postponing it could be even worse. There were no more loose ends. Jordan had done his part. The data had been collected. The investigation was underway. Now all that remained was to prepare the ground for the final showdown. Ethan typed the reply, "Tomorrow, office, 8 in the morning," and he pressed send. The following morning, Ethan arrived earlier than ever at the Caldwell Financial Building. The hallways were still empty, lit only by the automatic lights that switched on as he passed. It was like walking inside a cocoon, a liminal space between before and after. He entered his own room and immediately locked the door, something he rarely did. He turned on his computer, opened Jordan's report, and began preparing the dossier he would use in the confrontation. Each graph, each digital signature, each trace of manipulation was put in order, like pieces of a silent arsenal. But Ethan wasn't just preparing to present evidence, he was preparing himself emotionally. For years, he had ignored small signs, decisions made without consultation, secret meetings, changes that seemed too necessary. He always attributed everything to Adrian's aggressive leadership style. He always justified to himself that his brother had different methods but common goals. Now everything was clear, and he needed to be ready to face the truth without looking away. When he finished organizing the documents, he looked at the clock. 7:42. There were only 18 minutes left. Each second seemed to stretch out. He tried to keep his body still, but felt the adrenaline coursing through his muscles like an electric current. The air seemed thick, compressed, heavy with anticipation. At the same time, he realized that something inside him had changed. He was no longer the cautious and tense man who had started this investigation. There was a new, almost palpable focus, something that had emerged from the difficult decisions of the last few days. A kind of calculated coldness that came from the certainty of being on the right track. Then, someone knocked on the door. 2 beats, slow, deliberate. Ethan straightened his posture. "Come in." The door opened and Adrian entered. He wore an impeccable suit, his cold smile perfectly placed. But there was something different in his gaze, a subtle shadow of worry that he tried to hide. "Good morning, brother," Adrian said, closing the door calmly. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He simply indicated the chair in front of the table. Adrian sat down. He crossed his legs. He intertwined his hands. Everything about it seemed carefully rehearsed, and then Ethan realized this would not be a cordial encounter. It would be a silent battle, fought word by word, a duel in which truth, lies, and manipulation would be sharp weapons. And it was about to begin. Ethan rested his hands on the table, looking directly into Adrian's eyes. "Indeed," he said. "We do." The world seemed to hold its breath once again. The climax was approaching. The silence in the office seemed solid, almost physical. Ethan and Adrian stared at each other like two generals before the final battle, each trying to decipher the other's strategy without revealing their own. The digital clock emitted a small click every second, the only sound besides the two men's restrained breathing. Ethan was the first to move. He turned the monitor toward his brother. The data was there, impeccably organized, digital signatures, financial flows, chronological comparisons, glaring discrepancies when placed side by side. Adrian didn't move. He didn't look away. He didn't blink. "Do you recognize this?" Ethan asked, his voice firm. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, assessing the screen with an unreadable expression. "I recognize that you've been very busy lately," he said, "and that you're collecting data in a selective way." "It's not selectivity," Ethan retorted. "It's precision. And when you have precision, Adrian, you don't need interpretations." The tension in the air rose slightly. Adrian crossed his hands over his knee, maintaining his usual polished smile, but there was something fragile at the edge of that smile, a crack. "Do you really think that proves anything?" Adrian asked. "Digital signatures can be manipulated, logs can be recreated, even patterns can be faked." Ethan leaned forward. "They can, but not those. Not the way they were done. Their patterns are too consistent. The time between operations, the windows you used, even the frequency with which you preferred to modify small values instead of large sums. They're your tics, Adrian, your habits, and habits can't be faked." Adrian clenched his jaw. It was the first real crack. Ethan realized this and moved forward. "You started small," he continued. "Micrometric adjustments. A 3-digit transfer here, a rounding value there, invisible to automatic audits. But over the years, it became an entire structure. And when you noticed I was getting closer, you tried to erase it." Adrian took a deep breath. Then he stood up slowly and walked to the window. He observed the city below with his hands in his pockets, as if searching the horizon for an answer he already knew would not come. "You don't understand," he said, without turning around. "You never understood." "Then explain it to me," Ethan replied, standing up as well. Adrian remained silent for a few seconds. Finally he turned, leaning against the railing, his expression transformed. The elegant, calculating executive was gone. There was only weariness, frustration, suppressed anger. "I held this company together single-handedly for years," Adrian said, his voice heavy with the emotion he had always refused to show. "While you were always the board's favorite, the prodigy, the name they wanted to put on their sleeves. I was just the guy who made it work, the one who stayed in the shadows, cleaning up what nobody saw." "And he decided to pay for it?" Ethan retorted. "No," Adrian replied intensely. "I decided to build a contingency fund, something for when, not if, but when, this company collapsed. Because it was going to collapse, Ethan. They made stupid decisions. They took too many risks. They didn't listen. And I had to protect my family from the disaster that everyone knew was coming." Ethan stood motionless. The revelation hit him like an unexpected blow. Adrian continued, "I never took a penny more than necessary. Never. All I did was prevent the Caldwell name from being dragged down when everything collapsed. I did what you didn't have the courage to do." "That doesn't justify fraud," Ethan said, his voice firm. "It doesn't justify years of manipulation. It doesn't justify lying to me." Adrian stepped forward. "I lied to everyone, Ethan, because no one would be willing to hear the truth. This company has been rotting from the inside for a long time. Only I saw it, and only I acted to prevent its collapse." Ethan stared at his brother, feeling something he never expected to feel there. Pity. But he didn't let it control him. "You spent years saying you'd do anything for the family," Ethan said, "but you forgot the essential thing, trust. I trusted you, Adrian. I trusted you more than anyone. And you used that as a tool." Adrian's expression changed. It became gloomy. "And what do you intend to do now?" he asked slowly. "Turn myself in." Ethan walked to the table, picked up an envelope he had prepared, and placed it on the tabletop. He pushed it towards Adrian. Adrian opened it. Inside, there was everything. Reports, printed evidence, analyses, signatures, a body of evidence so complete that no lawyer could dismantle it. "I'll give you one chance," Ethan said. "Just one. You'll resign today. You'll return what you embezzled. You can leave the country if you want, but you won't destroy what we've built. Not while I'm here." Adrian slammed the envelope shut. "What if I don't accept?" Ethan took a deep breath. His hands were steady. "Then I'll go all the way," he replied. "And you know I never lose." Adrian stood completely still. 1 second, 2, 3, and then he smiled. Not a cold smile, but a sad smile. "I always knew," Adrian said softly, "that you would be the only one capable of bringing me down." The climax was sealed, not with shouting, not with violence, but with the brutal truth between two brothers who finally stopped hiding from each other and understood that this moment would change everything forever. After the confrontation, Adrian left the office without saying anything more. He simply gripped the envelope tightly enough to crumple the edges and left, his step firm, but laden with something that Ethan only later realized was resignation. The door closed with a soft click, a sound almost gentle, considering the weight of what had just happened. Ethan stood there, motionless, letting the silence fill the space. There was no victory in the room. There was no relief, only a profound feeling that something had been ripped from its place, and that now the world needed to reorganize itself around that void. He knew the next step was inevitable, and he took it. He called the board for an extraordinary meeting, presenting not all the evidence, but enough to justify Adrian's unexpected resignation, who had sent a formal statement a few hours later. In the short text, he assumed internal responsibilities and cited administrative decisions incompatible with remaining in office. No explicit admission, no denial either. Ethan understood perfectly. Adrian was taking the path that would allow him to survive. The board accepted the resignation with tense expressions, but without resistance. The potential crisis, scandal, media attention, a collapse of market confidence had been averted before it even began. And this was mainly due to the precision with which Ethan had prepared. In the following days, Ethan reorganized the finance department, revised internal procedures, and silenced vulnerabilities that no one had dared touch for years. He worked harder than he ever had before, not out of necessity, but to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. Jordan stayed by his side. He proved to be a competent, discreet, and above all, loyal ally. Ethan transferred him to a strategic position, offering him autonomy and resources. It was recognition for courage shown at a critical moment. But even as the company adjusted, something inside Ethan remained restless. The feeling of rupture, a broken bond that would never be restored, accompanied every decision, every meeting, every moment of silence. Until one particularly cold night, he received an unexpected message, an unknown number. "I must admit, you were brilliant. But remember, the truth is never just what's in a file." "Hey!" A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. Surprise, inevitable, annoying. At the same time, he understood something profound. The game between them had never been just about money, fraud, or power. It had been about perception, about interpretation, about two ways of seeing the same world, one through logic, the other through instinct. And perhaps on some level they were both right. But there was a key difference. Ethan had made the choice to move forward without carrying shadows, and that changed everything. He deleted the message, put his phone aside, and gazed at the horizon through the window of his penthouse. The city lights shone brightly, reflecting life unfolding in every possible direction. And for the first time since the beginning of it all, Ethan felt like he was breathing weightlessly. Nothing would be the same again, neither for him nor for Adrian. But he was ready, ready to lead, ready to rebuild, ready to carry not someone's shadow, but their own light. The future, uncertain as always, finally seemed to belong to him, and he stared at him without looking away. Months later, in a discreet New York cafe, Ethan opened his bank app just to check a routine corporate deposit. When the screen refreshed, he froze. An anonymous transfer, Large, precise, calculated, had been credited. No description, no traceable origin, just a number. 7.14 in the reference field. Adrian's birthday. Ethan let out a short laugh. Not of humor, but of recognition. The game wasn't over, but now he knew how to play better. He put his phone away, finished his coffee, and left. The future continued to move. In the basement of an unassuming building in Chicago, a room lit only by screens displayed financial data streams from around the world. Among them, a recent transaction stood out in green. The anonymous transfer to Ethan's corporate account. A man, seated in front of the monitors, watched the final confirmation appear on the screen. It was Adrian. He didn't seem defeated. He seemed different, calmer, more calculating, almost methodical. His eyes followed a growth chart that silently formed a pattern that only he would understand. "He'll realize," she murmured, almost smiling, "and when he does, he'll choose." The screen in front of him displayed two possible routes, and on the other side of the country, Ethan didn't even know that the next move had already begun. The email arrived one ordinary morning, while Ethan was reviewing quarterly reports. It had no sender, no subject line, just an encrypted attachment. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but something about the format, the file's precision, it had a signature: share. When he decoded it, he found only a text document with 2 lines. "Every story needs a final chapter. Here's mine." Below, a secure link to a protected folder. Ethan hesitated. He took a deep breath, and he opened it. Inside, there were complete reports, bank statements, messages, transfers, and audio recordings, all meticulously organized with surgical precision, irrefutable evidence implicating third parties. Not him. A larger, much larger scheme that had never been uncovered, one that Adrian had clearly brought down single-handedly and quietly. At the end of the file, there was a short note. "If you received this, it means I've decided to stop. The truth is greater than us. Use this only if necessary. You won, not because you exposed me, but because you saw me." Ethan felt a strange weight in his chest. It wasn't remorse, it wasn't guilt, it was understanding, a rare kind of clarity that only appears when two adversaries finally recognize what they truly are to each other. Hours later, the company phone rang. A neutral voice reported, "Mr. Pierce, we've found a body in the Owens Mountains. Documents indicate it's Adrian Hale. We need you to come and confirm." Ethan closed his eyes. The end, real and inevitable, had arrived. At the scene, the body was preserved by the cold. There were no signs of violence, only an envelope in the inside pocket of the coat. Inside, a single handwritten sentence: "Now you walk alone. Do better than me." And, for the first time since it all began, Ethan felt neither the triumph of victory nor the weight of defeat. He felt only the responsibility, enormous, silent, definitive, of someone who inherits not an enemy, but the legacy of someone who, despite everything, chose to leaving doors open instead of walls. Upon returning to the city, Ethan went up to the rooftop, opened the window, and observed the pulsating lights of New York, as vibrant as ever. And he said, in a low voice, "I'll do better." Then he closed the window, put the envelope away, and moved on, not as someone who had won a war, but as someone who had finally understood why it needed to happen. And there, with no turning back, the story came to an end.